Hello, I'm Emil Sayegh, CEO of Entirety, and we're going to be talking about cybersecurity at a time of crisis today. Cybersecurity plays a role in any time, but especially in times of crisis. We've been in a global pandemic for 9 months, social unrest, economic uncertainty, so on and so forth, and certainly cybersecurity is being injected in all of these discussions. So we'll talk about that today and how it's evolved and why particularly people need to be careful about it in times of crisis. So the first thing we'll discuss is how cybersecurity fit in today's business landscape. We'll talk about some fundamentals of cybersecurity, and then we'll talk about the business impact of cybersecurity and have a few questions that each of you should be asking yourselves. Let's talk a little bit about the cyber threat evolution. And cyber threat evolution has evolved from being basically a hacker sitting in their basement that is creating viruses and for their own benefit or just to kind of mess with people, a bunch of kids that are on summer break that just want to wreak havoc. That's kind of the perception that a lot of people have of hackers, to essentially today being nation states and factories of hackers that go to work from 8 to 5 just being hackers. The threat has evolved in a basically something to either make a little bit of money or just to kind of wreak havoc just for the sake of it, to becoming a major criminal enterprise. So it started in '71 with the first virus, and essentially, evolved with the advent of the internet to breaking websites, right? And then there was a few viruses like those that were around in 2000, 2004, called I Love You and Melissa were, a couple of the viruses back then. It evolved into phishing, which is identity theft by pretending to be a trusted organization. They send you an email from somebody that you think you trust, or they pretend to be somebody you trust. So you respond, they send you a link, you go in, and it's a website that looks like something that you're familiar with. It's a portal of your company or a FedEx site or UPS site. You enter your credentials, they steal those credentials, and the rest is history. So in 2007, 2008, we started seeing massive denial of service attacks. This is where they planted certain bots that are dormant on certain computers, and then they will invoke those without you knowing, without the person that owns the computer knowing, and attack other websites, other computers, to essentially bring them down and shut them down because of excess traffic. And then we started seeing spyware and phishing attacks that are becoming means of infiltration of computer systems. And spyware essentially is exactly what it is. It's a piece of software that is embedded in a software that is well known, and essentially is acting as a spy that is logging your key strokes and sending them to a nefarious entity that will use it against you or against the organization that you work in. And then in 2015, we started seeing the first strains of ransomware. Ransomware essentially is when software is introduced into the network and they lock the data, your data, away from you. They take it over and say, we're not going to give you that data back. We're not going to give you a website back until you pay us a handsome amount of money. And that became more and more sophisticated as they started using Bitcoin so that they can really protect their anonymity, right? And that became more and more of an issue here over the last 3 years, where there's been some major high threat and high dollar attacks all over the world with some very, very reputable organizations. When we're talking about cyber attacks, there are multiple entry points. We talked about phishing. This is where you surrender personal information unknowingly, right? Malware, on the other side, on the other hand, is basically malicious software that is sitting on your computer that's collecting that information. So phishing, they ask you, they trick you into surrendering that information by clicking on a link that looks trusted, but really is not. And it's coming from an email that potentially is trusted, but is not, right? And then malware, again, is software that's sitting on your computer and collecting information or trying to lock you out of the system, lock you out of the data that you have, lock you out of your application, right? And then you have attacks that are either using your own computers or are being used against you, against your applications, which are denial of service attacks. And then these are massive global attacks of thousands and thousands, sometimes millions of computers that that have viruses that are sitting on them, get invoked, like zombies. They wake up and they start attacking a certain target and bring it down because of excess traffic, and they bring down the DNS. And then, by the same token, now we have Internet of Things. So these are routers that are spread all over the place. They're industrial monitoring devices. They're TVs could be viewed as Internet of Things devices, right? So your phone, your Fitbit type devices, all of these are Internet of Things, and all of these could be used also as points of attack, as points of intrusion, for phishing, for malware, so on and so forth. And then you have sophisticated attacks like SQL injection attacks. This is when they insert data inside of your databases and essentially corrupt the data and or steal the data, divulge it to a third party. So multiple points of attack could be your databases, could be your computer, could be the network, so on and so forth. And what is making everything more complex is that now our data is not all sitting inside of our data center or inside of our closet, right? It's being spread in the public cloud, private cloud, even the public cloud or private cloud have multiple flavors. Azure, AWS, Google. Some people have on some specialty or specialty public clouds like Oracle or even Alibaba. On the private cloud, some people are using VMware, OpenStack. So your data is everywhere. So not only do we have multiple points of attacks, as we saw in the last slide, but also your data is everywhere. And COVID-19 has changed business in a massive way. Bloomberg has called it the world's largest work from home experiment, right? And truly it is. And what that's done is essentially created travel restrictions. So now we have canceled events that are driving large online meetings. Well, then we also have, canceled in-person school that is driving, massive amounts of students that are studying online remotely, university students, elementary students, work from home, employers like us that are, all working from home, or a large portion of their employees are working from home, right? So now the security perimeter has expanded to home offices. Well, you may say, well, look, fine, we've kind of figured it out, but look, the problem is that our security is not set up to be completely all from home, at least not at this point. We're using VPNs, we're using other things, but now the IT department, the people that are in charge of, frankly, running and monitoring our network are working from home. And that's causing a security risk in itself, because those folks usually perform a lot of the high sensitivity activities from within the confines of the office. So where's cloud in all this? Cloud is helping a lot. As we talked about, we enabled people to work from home, give people VPNs, virtual private networking, other enhanced tools to make remote work possible for almost everything that we do, right? And frankly, I've written a lot about this in my column in Forbes. So if you want to check it out, there's a bunch of articles that I wrote on Forbes. If you just Google Emil Sayegh Forbes, you'll see all my articles there. I publish about one every 2 weeks, and this is exactly what I talk about. But cloud can help even more, a lot more. And I want people to kind of open their eyes and not stereotype cloud as just this work from home experiment, right? So you have clouds that could help in case of a disaster recovery scenario where you have distributed systems, and then one portion of the cloud could pick up if a certain application goes down, right? It's mirrored, it's backed up. There's a disaster recovery scenario where the other portion of the cloud picks up to make you more redundant and more reliable, right? And then cloud-enabled businesses in this world where we're living in a pandemic and social unrest, you have less personnel that is having to go to the office to check, maintain, and monitor servers and storage installations, right? So cloud becomes, it gives you the ability to manage your IT world remotely. And then, frankly, in this world of economic uncertainty, moving from capex to opex, moving from paying upfront for those IT resources to more paying on a monthly basis and pay-per-use is very, very attractive to make the cost equation a lot more receptive in this time of economic strain that is on everyone. And look, as we prepare for the recovery of the economy, businesses need to scale, and cloud can help people scale in a very rapid manner, right? If they put their stuff in the cloud, then they can pay for what they're using now, kind of correlated to the point I just made. But when the business picks up, then they can scale very, very quickly and pay as they grow. And then implementing automation. We talked about cloud-enabled businesses having less personnel in data centers, so they're not as exposed to the risk of social unrest and or the risk of the pandemic and getting sick. But implementing automation so that things can go a lot faster, so that they can have a better user experience, and so that it's less error prone. With automation, you can have a lot less error. So cloud can help in a lot of ways, and these are things that you can implement, or you can partner with a managed services provider that can help you with these things if you don't have the talent internally, or you don't want to invest in the talent internally to implement some of these things. So let's define cybercrime a little bit more. So cybercrime is really the unlawful activities carried out through computers or the internet, where the computer is either used as a tool, as a target, or both, right? So a tool, that's the example of the denial of service attack, where your computer, you don't know, unbeknownst to you, is being used to attack other computers. A target, this is where your computer systems are being used for ransomware, or you're the subject of the denial of service attack, and then or both. It's obvious what it is. So so there are lots of threats to cloud security. There's data breaches. Somebody steals the data, exposes it to the world. There's a lot of cases where they've just exposed that data. WikiLeaks is a good example, but there's tons of other data that is being stolen so that it gets sold. So this is personal information, credit card data, on and on and on and on. Social security, and that is caused by usually weak identity and access management and insecure APIs, application programming interfaces. So that have those application programming interfaces could have weaknesses that get hacked, and off you go. Frankly, we talked about malicious insiders before. You've got to protect against that. You got to figure out how to protect against that. And then, there's always the ever present threat of shared technologies, where you are using a piece of software that is not necessarily provided by your corporation. You're using SaaS software or whatnot, and then there's some inherent risk in that piece of software that you are using unbeknownst to you, and then that gets hacked, and that they move into your infrastructure, and it's a big problem. So there's a lot of threats there. that you have to be cognizant about. And then certainly last year has been a banner year, and 2020 has been even worse. As an example, there's been tons of ransomware attacks, there's been supply chain attacks, and then attacks on all the Internet of Things devices, with hackers breaking into high-value networks through those endpoints that are supposedly, doing just collection, but they end up being basically computers that are on the edge that are one way for hackers to infiltrate. So some of the examples were Magellan Health, which essentially affected employees, and the data consisted honestly of all their credentials, W-2, 1099 details, Social Security, taxpayer ID numbers, all of that was hacked and divulged, with Magellan Health, which supposedly is under HIPAA regulation, and supposedly has all these HIPAA safeguards and compliance. But it happens to the best of them. The other one is EasyJet, where 9 million customer emails, addresses, travel details, and credit card information got divulged, and that was a major breach, which was basically started with phishing and evolved. And a major ransomware attack was against a law firm called Grubham Shire, and they're out of New York, and they manage a lot of the talent, including Lady Gaga, right? And they litigate some of the stuff, and 756 gigabytes of private information, client attorney privilege information, was leaked, that was a major data breach that happened this last year, and it's on and on and on. There's more and more. There's schools, there's small school districts that are getting breached. Last one was the Texas Department of Transportation. Again, got breached. So lots of different breaches are happening, and you may think, look, I'm a small institution or small company. I don't have much to be breached, but you would be surprised. You could be breached so that they can breach somebody else that you're serving. They could come in through you to reach one of your customers or one of your partners, and you could be just used as a jumping point. So everybody should be extremely careful in these times, because they're using this time of crisis essentially to keep us, while we're off balance, moving in and out of the office, and worried about all these different things, to essentially use that moment of weakness so that they can attack us and steal credentials and whatnot. So remember, security is a full-time job. It's not a thing that some IT guy does on the side. It's not part-time responsibility of the IT department. This is a full-time job. It needs to be 24/7, 365. And your company deserves to have, basically a team. If you don't have the team internally, but a team that is monitoring all the traffic that's coming in and all the traffic that's going out, that is spotting unusual traffic and patterns. They could spot an internal leak, right? Because data is moving in a way that it's not normal, and you could identify a internal weakness that you have in your staff or your security, or external, as we talked about. It could be a piece of software that's running on your network, or it could be an outside threat coming in through the network. It could be email that is suspicious that is coming in, phishing for information or whatnot. And there are three cycles in the cybersecurity, right? There's a detection period, there's a response period, and there's a recovery period. And you need to minimize the time to detect, and you use things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and people that are trained to look and detect the threat. So they look at forensic data, and then by correlating that with AI and machine learning, right, they say, okay, well, this looks suspicious. This is a threat. They discover the threat, They qualify the threat. Now, not every threat is going to get qualified and pass the muster. Some of them are going to be normal traffic that just looks suspicious, but the ones that look suspicious and are identified as a threat immediately gets moved to get investigated very quickly, and then they get neutralized. Now, if the threat ran for a little bit and caused damage, or ran for a long time and caused damage, then you have to go and do remediation and recover, and so on and so forth. So simplistically, this is essentially what the threat lifecycle looks like, and what people need to be aware of. And then again, that threat lifecycle needs to be comprehended in two different ways: security in the cloud. So all of that needs to be in the cloud, and then of the cloud. So the MSP cloud provider responsibility is the security of the cloud. The security in the cloud is really a shared responsibility with the customer, and they need to make sure that they have data encryption. They need to make sure that they are enforcing their password rules and their authentication rules, and so on and so forth. Whereas the MSP and cloud provider needs to be making sure that all these things are present for the infrastructure and the applications that they're providing to the customer. So every one of us should be asking themselves these 5 questions. Do you have a plan in place to prevent cyber attacks? And what I mean by a plan is not something that you know in your head, or something that you scribbled in an email or on a notepad, but I'm talking about a comprehensive plan that's gotten your IT department's approval, that's gotten your CIO's approval, I would say your CEO and senior level team's approval, and even your board approval. This is a board level discussion now. Compliance and security is a board level discussion because it could wreck the company if you're not careful, and it has wrecked a lot of companies already, and cost them millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, as well as reputational risk. So the question is not whether you have a plan in your head, but whether you have a plan that is completely ratified across the organization. The second thing is that, does your staff have information security and risk management expertise? And I'm not talking about one person on your staff that will go on vacation, or go to sleep, or get sick. I'm talking about 24/7 by 365 expertise, because your business deserves to be protected the entire time. Number 3, have you implemented IT security related tools and controls? And I'm talking about, this is the responsibility of the excuse me, of your team. I'm talking about the encryption, I'm talking about the password rules, authentication rules, so on and so forth. Again, in partnership with your MSP, you got to make sure that these are the rules that are implemented. In partnership with your MSP, you got to make sure that the network traffic is being monitored 24/7 by 365. And then the fourth one, which we touched on, have you confirmed that you're in compliance with industry regulatory requirements? So these are compliance things like GDPR. You can't do business with Europe unless you're GDPR compliant. Now we have California and Texas that are coming up with their own regulatory privacy rules, right? If you are in the education field, you got to be FERPA compliant. If you are in the healthcare field, you got to be HIPAA or HITRUST compliant. If you are in the financial services and fintech field, you got to be PCI compliant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is a board level discussion. That is a senior management level discussion that you need to be having in your company and escalating so that everybody's aligned on it. And then the last thing is that, is your IT security and business priorities all aligned? Is the IT team aligned with the security objectives? And then are these two things aligned with the business priorities? And does the business need the IT team and security team to be advancing their cause versus sitting there building up an infrastructure and a team to monitor threats 365 days a year, 7/24? So if the business is needing the IT team to essentially advance the cause of the business, or meet certain usability requirements for their applications, is the time better spent on other things other than doing these security tasks versus finding somebody that can do them much more efficiently and effectively, essentially. So with that, I mean, these are the 5 questions that I would encourage everybody to be thinking about. If you have any thoughts or need any help, this is essentially what Entirety does. We're a managed services provider where we manage everything from infrastructure on up. We are multi-cloud specialists. We can manage things on premises, in the public cloud, on Azure, on AWS, in our premises, in our private cloud, on VMware or whatnot. So we have lots of capabilities that way, but also do all the managed services that sit on top of infrastructure. Things like monitoring, like patching, things like disaster recovery, backup, managed security, which we talked about, managing databases, and then managing compliance. So this is where compliance and security become 2 sides of the same coin. Managing the compliance and managing the security become 2 sides of the same coin, and you need a comprehensive strategy there, whether you do it yourself or whether you work with somebody like us that can help you. With that, have a great day, and then hopefully you found some nuggets that were helpful here.